Okay, so welcome to the Chapter 12 demo number 1. We're going to use the same file that we've been using for the last couple chapters. We're going to use that that Module 2 demo Revit file. So if you want to go ahead and get that open, it doesn't matter if you use one that we've started with or if you just start over with a blank one. I'm starting with a blank one here partially, so all we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting roofs on these structures, so it really doesn't matter what's happening down below. So if yours looks a little bit different than mine, don't worry about it. We're going to be practicing using a couple of different roof types, and if you drop the roof tool down, you can see that the first two here are what we're going to be looking at today. Roof by footprint and roof by extrusion. So there are a couple different ways that we can create roofs by footprint, and that's what this video is going to be focusing on, and then the follow-up discussion in class is going to focus on the roof by footprint, or roof by extrusion. So the two types of footprint roofs that we're going to be focusing on today, one is going to be for this residential structure, and as we know, most residential structures are going to have a sloping roof. On a commercial building like this, oftentimes we're going to have a flat roof. And the way those roofs tie into the building are going to be a little bit different depending on which type of roof you're going to use. Both of them, though, are going to be defined in a very similar way to how we defined floors and ceilings. We're going to basically be in plan view. We're going to be drawing the outline of the boundary of the roof. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into that. We're going to start with the residential roof. So I'm going to flip over to a elevation view. It's always a good idea to figure out where you want the roof, and there's no better way to do that than just looking at an elevation view. You can see the top of the wall is defined here by level 2. So that is the plan view that we're going to go to create the roof. Now, certainly we could create the roof on the floor plan view, but then we just have to remember to set the roof level to level 2. But I'm going to go to level 2 floor plan, and it will show you this wall sort of as a grayed out looking wall. The reason it's grayed out is because we're actually seeing that in projection. We're not cutting through it like we are over here, but that's neither here nor there. So with the residential roof, we're going to be specifying an overhang, and that's the primary difference between footprint of a roof over a residential structure versus a footprint of a commercial structure. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's go ahead and focus on the residential for now. Go ahead and let's pick a roof type. So we're going to go ahead and launch the roof tool. The default is by footprint. And then we'll just go to the drop down here once that roof command is active. We'll see if we can find something that matches what we might use on a residential structure. And here's something right here: wood rafter 8-inch asphalt shingle insulated. It's not exactly what we might want, but keep in mind we're trying to save a little time, and so we're going to do this just using the tools we have at hand. All right, so it's important to remember that there are a lot of options whenever we're creating things, right? So we'll kind of just focus on the important ones for now. Primarily, we're going to be creating the boundary line, so make sure the boundary line is selected. That should be the default. And we are going to be using the Pick Walls tool because the walls are there and they're selectable. It makes a lot of sense to use those sort of as the element that we're going to trace. Now, if we do have an overhang, and we don't always, but if we do have an overhang, we need to specify that in the options bar right here. And then we also want to define slope if the edge of the roof we're creating is a sloping edge. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, you know that through our discussions in construction theory classes that any roof is either going to be, you're going to have an eave going across there where you would see a gutter. That's a horizontal eave. Or if you have a gable end, you're going to have a sloping edge, right? So in other words, we might put a gable. In fact, we will do that later right here. We're going to put a gable right here. So this would not be a sloping edge right here. This would not define a slope. It'll make more sense, I think, in a minute once we create this thing. So for now, let's go ahead and make sure that define slope is checked. let's set our overhang to 1.5 feet, so 1.5. And then we're not going to check extend to wall core. It's not really necessary. All right, so now with that 1'6" overhang selected, you can see that as you move your cursor up and down, it gives you a preview of which way that roof is going to be created. Obviously, we want it to the outside. That's where the overhang is going to go. And so we're just going to pick those boundary walls one at a time, and it should clean up those corners for us pretty well. And so you should end up with something like this. Now, before we click finish, just take a look at these symbols, these little triangle symbols. That was created because we elected to have that all of those roof edges define a slope. If we had unchecked that, you would not get that little corner, and then it would create a gable on that edge. But let's go ahead and finish this. This is what we would call a hip roof. And so we're going to click finish. And it does look a little funny because we're cutting through the cutting plane of this view is cutting off part of that roof. But if you flip to a 3D view, you can see pretty quickly what we ended up with here. So that, again, is a hip roof. And it's a hip roof because you have hips on all sides and you don't have any gables. Okay. All right, we'll get into a deeper discussion about hips and gables and things like that in our architecture class. But for now, we're just kind of learning the tools. Okay, so now that we've created that roof, it's sort of baked into the cake. We can go back and we can edit the footprint if we select it and choose to do that. But we can also make some changes to this roof without even editing it, just by going to the properties of the roof. So with it selected, look over at your properties palette and you can see one of the important things to keep in mind is the slope property. Now try to remember this. This is showing us a 9 and 12 slope, and everybody knows, I think, that just means that's a ratio of rise to run. So for every 9 inches we go up, we're going across 12 inches. So that's a 9 and 12 slope. If we want to change that to a lower slope, we could change it to something like 6 and 12. And the cool thing about changing the slope in the properties palette is all you have to do is type 6. It knows that it's inches / 12 inches. You don't have to type that whole thing out. Just type 6 or whatever slope that you want. 4, for example, and 12. Hit enter, and that's a really shallow slope, right? So set that where you want it. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to put mine back to 6, and it just updates automatically. Now, every slope on this roof is the same, which is why we were able to do that. But we won't always have that scenario, and so I'm going to show you how to edit individual slopes if we need to, and we're also going to go through and play around with overhangs a little bit, okay? So, I mentioned earlier that we could edit this roof footprint by selecting it and clicking edit. And that will take you back into this edit mode, and all of your lines all of a sudden are magenta again. And one of the things that we talked about a minute ago was how each of these edges does define a slope currently. But if we want to, for example, make a gable over the garage, we would select just that edge, and then we're going to go to the defines slope checkbox right here in the options bar. You could also access it through here in the option or in the properties palette, and we're just going to uncheck that. Okay, so you can see that that little triangle went away, and now if we click finish, you can see that that roof no longer defines a slope. Now it's a little misleading because this is sloping, right? But it's not sloping at the edge. It's sloping from this edge over here and this edge over here. It's going up and then back down to those two edges. This edge does not slope, okay? So that's basically how we're going to create our gables. All right, so nothing too tough about that so far. However, we can see that all of these walls are not really connecting to the roof. They're not going up to the roof, and that's a real problem for this one, right? We want that to go all the way up and fill in that gap. The good news is it's really easy to fix. All we have to do is use our Attach Top Base tool to fix that problem. So when we select a wall, anything that has sort of a vertical control on it, what you're going to get is one of the options you're going to get is this Attach Top Base tool right here. but we want to attach all of the walls, all of those perimeter walls to the roof, okay? And what that's going to do is it's basically going to say, okay, I don't care anymore what height you've given to this wall. I don't care anymore what level you've assigned to the top of this wall. I'm now going to attach to the underside of this roof. And no matter what happens to that roof, whether it goes up or down, those walls will always remain attached. So the wall would get taller and shorter if we raised or lowered the roof. Okay. So one of the neat selection tools in Revit that we don't use often enough probably is to hover over an object without clicking on it and then tapping the tab key. And what that does is it gives you, it'll toggle through some different options, but the first option here was to highlight all of those exterior walls. So Revit can kind of sense that those are all sort of joined together. It's part of the same group almost. And so now that they're all highlighted, we can click to select it and it'll select all of them. So you can see up here we have 6 walls selected now. So the only reason we did that selection thing is because we want to attach all of them. We don't want to do it one at a time if we can avoid that. Saves a little time. All right, so we'll click Attach Top Base. And the next thing would be to, what do we want to attach? Are we attaching the top of these walls to something or the base of the walls to something? Well, the base is already where it needs to be. So we're going to attach the top. And then the next step, if you look down here in the indicator line down here, it says select the roof, floors, blah, 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 that you want to attach the tops to. So we're just going to pick the roof. And you can see how that wall now jumped up and attached to the underside. A little less obvious, but these ones did too. You can kind of see that the top of that wall is now sloping in, conforming to the underside of that roof shape. Okay. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too painful for anybody yet. Okay, we're going to get to some trickier stuff later on, but for the most part, residential roofs of a very simple shaped house, all on one level, are pretty straightforward. They're not too tough. I'll have you check back in with me at the end of the 3rd semester and see if you still think residential roofs are easy. They can be extremely challenging for complicated roofs. Okay, so and we'll get some practice with that next semester as well. But try to understand the basics as best you can for now, and we'll get to that other stuff another time. Okay, so what if we wanted to adjust the overhang? You know how sometimes we have an overhang that's bigger than all the rest of them, right? So let's say we wanted to take this roof right here over the garage and we wanted to extend that eave out so that we have a little bit of a covered porch here on the front door. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and select the roof, click Edit Footprint, and then we're going to select this one edge. And you can see that the overhang is exactly what we set it at, 1'6". We're going to go ahead and change that. Let's make that 6 feet. So we're just going to type 6, enter. And you can see that it jumps out there. If we rotate around, I can say, well, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good size. Okay, that's going to cover that front porch. And now we're going to click Finish. But a funny thing happens when we click Finish. Rather than that eave coming straight out, what it did was it dropped. It just continued on the existing slope. The ridge here stayed in the same spot, and we ended up with an eave that's way too low now. So that looks funny, and it's going to function funny, and you might, for really tall people, hit their head on it. So we want to make sure that we know how to bring that eave back up even with all the other ones, but also still have it moved out over here with a 6-foot overhang. Okay, so there's a little bit of a trick that we can use to fix that. Let's go back into the edit mode, edit footprint. And now what we're going to do is we're going to align eaves. And that, when you're in edit mode, will be available over here in the ribbon. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that to start the command. And then it gives you a preview of where all of the eaves are relative to the level that the roof was placed on. So you can see that they're all sort of at -9 inches below, except for, and it's a little bit hard to see because the text size is so large. Let me see if I can change the scale if that helps. I'm going to change it to 1/4 inch. Okay, that's a little easier to see. So change your scale to 1/4 inch. But you can see that this one is 3 feet below, where all the other ones are 9 inches below, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to align the eaves, and you can see that there's one of two things that you can choose. You can either say, I want to adjust the height, or I want to adjust the overhang. Well, we don't want to adjust the overhang because we've already got that set where we want it. So we want the overhang to stay the same. So we're going to switch to adjust height and bring that up to where all the other ones are at that -9 inch position. Okay. So with adjust height selected, with align eaves selected, what we're going to do is follow what the little indicator at the bottom says. It says select an eave to align to, then select eaves to be aligned. So you pick the thing that you don't want to move first. So we'll pick any eave that you have set at -9. This is one of them. And then we'll pick this one. And you can see that now that also is at -9. Okay, so we basically just kind of like match properties, right? Let's go ahead and click finish, see what we've got. And you can see now that you may or may not like that design, but we have aligned that eave so that it's the same everywhere else, even though the overhang is quite a bit bigger. So for now, we're done with the residential roof. If that all went well for you, you can kind of leave that aside for a minute. And now we're going to be placing a roof on this larger building. It's more of a commercial type flat roof. Okay. So again, back to our elevation view. Let's make sure we know where we want to place that roof, and we're going to place it on the roof level here up at the 40-foot height. You can see that the parapet, the wall itself, is a bit taller, 3 feet taller than that. And then let's remember that roofs, just like ceilings, are aligned so that their bottom is aligned up with the level they're placed on. Okay, so remember that floors, we're going to align the top of the floor with the level. In other words, the floor will be starting here and going down from the level, but a roof starts here and goes up from the level. Okay, so when we're deciding, and the only reason I mention that is when we're deciding about the parapet height, we need to factor in the thickness of the roof so that we know how much taller that wall might be. Okay, but anyway, that's a design discussion. Let's get back to our Revit discussion. We're going to place a roof, a commercial type roof, at the roof level, and we're going to use a commercial roof type for that. Okay, so let's get to that level. First of all, we're going to go to the roof level again, and we can see the wall, we can see that parapet wall, but we can't see the guts of it. And usually, just like with floors and ceilings for that matter, we want to go into that wall a little bit because we're going to be attaching that structure not to the gypsum board layer, which actually is going to stop below the roof, but we're going to be attaching it to the structure of that wall. So in order to see the structure of that wall, we got to do one of a few different possible things, right? Number one, we could turn on an underlay of a lower floor, and that'd probably be the quickest and easiest thing to do. But the other thing we could do is change our view range. And so this is a perfect opportunity for us to play around with view range a little bit and get a little bit better idea, better understanding of what that actually is. So if we go back to our south elevation view, you can see that the parapet is only 3 feet above the roof level that we're on right now. Now remember, when we talk about view range and we talk about when we're in a floor plan view, our cut plane, how far above the floor is that cut plane usually when we've talked about this in the past? If you said 4 feet, or if you thought 4 feet, you would be correct. So we're not actually, our cut plane is up here someplace. So we're actually seeing the top of that wall in projection view. But if we change our cut plane to be only 2 feet above the level, then we will be cutting through that wall. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to that roof level, and we'll click on view range right here. And then right here under the cut plane setting, we're going to change that from 4 to 2. Now we also need to remember to change this to fine. And now we can see the interior of that wall. Okay, so depending on the structure, there's not really a good guideline I can give you as far as like where that roof boundary is going to fall within this structure. And it really will depend on the design, right? The structural design of the building. A lot of different ways this could go, but we're going to run it to this line right here. This is the second line in. You could also think of that as the inside face of the core boundary of this part of the wall, which is the stud layer. Okay, so this thick part right here is the stud layer. This is the gypsum board here. This is the sheathing on the outside. And we're going to run the boundary of that roof right to this line right here. Okay, just kind of give everybody a heads up where we're going with that. All right, so I've had sort of mixed results with how Revit behaves, and I haven't completely honestly figured out exactly why there's such a variation in how it behaves and the different options that are available, but we're just going to roll with it, and we'll take what Revit gives us because there's always a workaround with it. Here's what I mean. Let's go back to the roof tool. We're going to again use roof by footprint, and then we're going to make sure you remove the overhang, set that to 0, and uncheck define slope. Again, we're creating a flat roof on this thing. Sort of. All right, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then let's change the roof type to something a little more appropriate for this type of roof. We're going to go to steel truss, insulation, metal deck, EPDM. Okay. All right. So you can see that pick walls is selected, boundary line is selected. That's exactly what we want. And then we're also going to select this extend to wall core. Okay. We're going to use this pick walls tool, and we're going to try to align it with the part of the wall that we want. And you can see that what it's defaulting to is the center of the wall. And in some cases, you'll get an option up here on what part of the wall you want it to default to. We're not getting that with this operation. So what we have to do is kind of hover over the wall so it's highlighted and tap the tab key and cycle through the different options. So the next option, we can't really see it over here, but you kind of got to get over to the left here, and then you tab select, and now you can see that little dotted light blue line showing that that is lining up exactly on the part of the wall that I want it to. Okay. If you struggle with that, if you have trouble getting it to line up with the part of the wall that you want, let's say we wanted to line it up out here, I can tab select until my finger falls off, but it'll never hit that one with the options I have selected. So in some cases, if you can't get it to line up with the part of the wall you want, you can either draw it by using the line tool, or probably a better option would be to use the pick lines tool. Okay, so I'm just demonstrating this. You don't have to do this. But now if I hover over this line, I can tab select, or if I hover over this line, I should be able to tab select and see it highlight there. So I could run it all the way out to here. I can put it anywhere that I want just by hovering and tab selecting. We've seen that before. But let's go ahead and do it this way since it worked. We're going to go ahead and use the pick walls tool, boundary line, and then extend to wall core. And then I'm just going to tab until I see that highlight. Again, you got to be near the corner for you to see that preview. Okay. So tab, there it is. And I'm going to pick. And then my next click, I'll have to do the same thing. I'll tab, pick, and then it will fix that corner for me. So I'll probably have to do that on all of the sides, it looks like. What happens if I just click here? Yeah, it puts it in the wrong spot. Undo. Okay, so I'll get down here, tab, ooh, extend to wall core, tab, there we go. Just keep repeating that all the way around. You can do that too while I'm doing it. Just make sure you're following the same line all the way through. And I think I've got it all the way now. I think I've got that full perimeter. When you're happy with that, all your corners are cleaned up, go ahead and click finish. All right, so it's asking us, the floor, roof, topo solid overlaps the highlighted walls. Would you like to join the geometry and cut the overlapping volume out of the walls? We've seen that before. And when we do that with floors, the answer is yes, and the same will be true with the roof. So let's go ahead and say yes to that. And now we've created our roof. It's a little tough to see, right? And you can't really click it unless you have this select elements by face selected. And even with that selected, I still can't select it, right? All right, but let's cut a section through there just so we can kind of see what we've got. And I'm going to try to get it as close to the center of this section of the roof as possible, close to the midpoint. So I'm just going to cut a section right down about through here, and then let's go to that view. And you can see that there's my roof, there's my wall. Let's go ahead and turn on some details so we can actually see this thing. And let's go ahead and set the scale to something else so we can see a little more detail. Okay, so we've got the top of our wall set to parapet. You could make the argument that, yeah, we probably want to run that up a little bit higher. But for the most part, we've got this thing done. The only problem now is that roofs by code cannot actually be flat. Now, you may have heard me say that before. But here's a perfect example of a perfectly flat roof that would not pass code, nor would it shed water appropriately. So we'd be asking for trouble with a roof like this. We'd probably end up with progressive structural collapse. The goal here, as with any roof, is to be able to stop water and shed that water off of it. So how do we accomplish that with a flat roof? Well, we actually never really have flat roofs. There's always going to be at least a minimum slope, and code tells us that the minimum slope for any roof is 1/4 inch per foot. So how do we accomplish that? The trick is to slope the insulation. So down here you have the roof structure. I'm going to turn off thin lines for a second. Down here is the roof structure from here to here. From here to here, this hatched area, that's actually rigid foam insulation. And that rigid foam comes in sheets that are tapered. Now this insulation might be a little bit too thin. That's probably going to get too thin when we get down, when we slope it down to a drain, for example. But that rigid insulation, you can buy that in sheets that are already sloped at 1/4 inch per foot. So it's tapered, and we lay that on top of other pieces of insulation that are not tapered to achieve the thickness that we need. But at the end of the day, we're going to try to slope all of that stuff to an interior drain. Now, with a residential roof, I'm going to go to a site plan view. We're going to be sloping those roofs to the outside. We're going to be shedding that water to a gutter, to a downspout, and we're going to be shooting it out away from the foundation. On a commercial roof like this, what we're actually going to be trying to do in a lot of cases is push that water to the inside of the building to an internal drain that is going to go down through the building and ultimately to a storm sewer outside. Or it might even just poke through a wall outside to a splash block of some kind to push it away from the foundation. Either way, we're actually going to route that water from the roof through the building. Sounds dangerous, but it works really well as long as you install it properly. Like any other plumbing, you can create a reliable water removal system that's going to get that water out of your building. Okay, so what we need to do is come up with a strategy on how we're going to slope that roof. Now, you see a lot of different roof styles and a lot of different strategies employed, but as I look at an L-shaped roof like this, I think, well, it makes sense to kind of maybe come up with at least 3 drains. Maybe one for this half of the big building, one for this half, and then one for this little area down here possibly. But again, there's a lot of different ways that we could sort of break that up. Today we're talking more about how to use Revit than how to strategize exactly how we want to do a roof. Let's go back to the roof level for this so we can see the edge of our roof kind of back in here. But the way we're going to do this is we're going to divide this roof up into 3 distinct areas, each one sloping toward the center. Okay, so we're going to do that by creating what we call split lines and low points. The trick here, though, is we need to be able to select our roof. Okay, and I can't select my roof by just clicking on it. It's just not letting me do that, even though I have select elements by face selected. So sometimes what you have to do is get a little bit creative. And if you get in here close to the edge, the inside edge right here that we use for our boundary, and tap the tab key, eventually you might get the roof show up. And there it is. I had to actually click it 4 times before it would highlight, and now I'm going to pick it. And you can see, you know you got the right thing because you look over here in the properties and you can see it says roofs. Another strategy you could use is to do a right to left crossing window and then just filter out things that are not roofs. Now I've got it selected again. Once it's selected, you're going to get these tools right here under the shape editing panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a combination of things, but we're going to first add split lines. And these split lines are basically going to function as a point on the roof that's going to hold its elevation or thickness. Okay, and so you can kind of watch with the animation there. They're creating a split line and sort of diagonally so that this roof is actually, that roof that they showed in that animation would actually kind of slope away from the center. But what we're going to do is we're going to just divide the spaces up basically in half. Okay, so we're going to create a ridge from the midpoint of this edge. We're just going to kind of zoom out until we can find that midpoint. There it is. We'll zoom in closer, make sure that line is going to the midpoint of this line. This is a little bit tricky. You got to kind of feel your way around, but I finally got it. It's at 41.9 mark. I'll be picking my first point there, and just make sure that your split line goes all the way to that green preview line and that it's perfectly straight up and down. Okay, so we're going to go down to here next. So there's my first split line. My next one is just going to come across from this point right here. That one's a little easier to select. And then straight across again to the green line right here. So essentially I've divided that roof into 3 pieces now. A little piece here, big piece here, big piece here. Now I could have divided that up differently, a number of different ways, but for now this is going to work for us. All right, so the only other thing I have to do now is find the center of all 3 of those rectangles. And I've found the best way to do that is just to put a temporary line in there. I like to use detail lines for this. So the Annotate tab, Detail Line tool, and it doesn't really matter what line style you use, but we're just going to draw a diagonal line from one corner to the other, and we're going to be able to snap to the midpoint of that line to place the drain. Okay, so I'm going to start, let's see, I'm going to actually start right here, and I'm going to come up to this intersection right here, and then I'm going to continue up to this intersection right here. Oh, it's not going to let me, is it? Okay, I'll have to hit escape. I'll do my next detail line from that point to this point. I don't know why it's locking in that angle. That's interesting. So I think what's happening is I'm too close to a polar tracking angle of 45, and it's just not letting me pull off of that to get to the end. You might be running the same problem, you might not, your settings might be different, but either way, fortunately in Revit there's more than one way to find the center of a rectangle. I'm just going to go from the midpoint of this vertical line then straight across, and again I'm just marking the center point so I know where to place that drain. So I got one there. I can pick the center, the midpoint of that line, and I'm going to create one more over here. And again, I'm just running it out to the edge of the roof so that I can get and track that midpoint for those drains. Okay, now that I've got 3 lines that are marking essentially the center, the midpoints in both directions of my rectangles, now I can do that final step. Okay, so again, we have to select the roof. I'm just going to do it using the filter trick. Say OK. And then we get our tools back for shape editing, and then I'm going to add a point right now. I'm actually going to add 3 points. So you can see there's going to be a ridge going across here. That's going to be at the same elevation as the perimeter. Same thing right here. There's a ridge going across. So that is going to hold. And now I need to create 3 low points. So for this, we're going to say offset from the surface minus 2 inches. That's where we're going to set those points. And you can see it's snapping to the midpoint of my detail line. So I'm going to create one right here, click, one right here. Give me the midpoint, there it is. And then one at the midpoint of this line as well. Okay, now I can get rid of my detail lines that I created. There should be one right here as well. And now what I'm left with are the different triangular shaped surfaces. So you can kind of picture what's happening here. All of these triangles are starting at the high point at the edge and they're sloping down to the intersection in the middle. Same thing here, it's sloping down, sloping down, sloping down. You can kind of picture that when you highlight it like this, a little easier to see. So again, this is a ridge across here, that's a high point, and everything is sloping down and away from that. Down and away from the perimeter as well. Same thing here, just a much smaller scale, sloping down to the middle. Okay. So all of that insulation is now sloping. Let's go ahead and take a look at the section view. You can see that it is in fact sloping, but there's a little bit of a problem. We are also sloping the bottom of this roof. So just like when we did this with the floor drain, we need to go into the properties of that roof, edit, edit, and then we need to change one of these layers to variable over here, right? We want the insulation to be variable in this case. That's what's actually going to be sloping and getting thinner or thicker. So we're going to go ahead and change this to variable. Click OK. That's going to straighten up the structure. The structure now, the bottom of the structure, you can see aligns now with the roof level again. So does the top of the structure. The only thing that's changing thickness is the insulation as it gets thinner toward the middle. Okay, so that's it for part 1. Nothing too painful. We'll get in here and we'll do some additional stuff in class. But for now, go ahead and save this how it is, and we'll see you all next time in class.